Hello, everybody.
Hi, we have another minute or two as people are flying in from all of the corners of the world to be here. So just welcome here. Glad to have you.
Thank you.
So far, 46. There's going to be more, I know it.
Okay.
Lee,
How
is
come
this
Betty
going to be
Bennett is upside down?
Who's upside down?
She's muted.
Trying to change that.
I have never seen that before. That's awesome.
Oh, Betty Bennett, you are upside down. Or
Well,
maybe we're all upside down and
Isn't
Betty
that-
is right side up.
Isn't that
That's
the weather?
possible.
How's the weather in Australia, Betty?
That's
It's
fascinating.
on the top of my head, yeah.
I don't even know how to make it do that.
But I want to know how. Oh,
Me
John,
too.
John is tipping us sideways and upside down. Oh.
Oh, John's on a roller coaster.
Oh, Lord.
There is apparently a filter that will do that, because actually after that lawyer was a cat, another one came out with someone that was upside down.
I have totally been looking for that lawyer's cat filter because I really want it.
I am not a cat. I'm really here. I'm not a cat.
I'm really
And Diane, yes, this is being recorded.
as a video.
Rita, your top is such a pretty color.
Thank you. This is Pink Shirt Day. It's an indigenous design that was done out here on the West Coast, and I think Lee's got one on, and
I
Ruth
do
has got
too.
one on.
It's just a t-shirt. There it is,
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. And
Oh,
for Pink
so
Shirt Day,
beautiful.
thank you.
Very nice.
Yeah, I forgot about that. I remember observing it when I worked in the schools, but I forgot about it today.
That's great.
I tried to
Well,
order one of those shirts and they were out of them by the time I tried to order.
Oh my goodness. Yes. Well, the whole idea is anti-bullying. So that's what that's about. I think that if we're just raising our awareness and being, then that's a good thing.
it says build others up, don't tear them down, and it's an otter design.
$2:01. We got 61 on. Do we still have people flying in from the waiting room?
Nope.
Okay. Well, let's get rolling because I want to honor the time, honor your time, as you're here and you're on time, and thank you for that. Welcome everyone here. You'll notice that if you have your chat open, that that Chris has posted in the chat our acknowledgement that we are striving towards right relationship, and we acknowledge that all of us are on land that has been cared for by indigenous folk for generation after generation. And so I encourage you to read that through and consider where you are and on whose land you are. And in gratitude, we come to a place where we can worship and pray and praise and play on this land, and are grateful for those who have cared for it for many, many years. Just wanted to let you know that we have on our call today, we have Trina Duncan, who is our executive minister, and we have Chris Corrigan, who's going to be doing our workshop today. And I don't want to spend too much time, blah, 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 but what I will do is open with a word of prayer and then hand it over to Trina for introductions and announcements. So let us gather our hearts and minds in prayer. Holy One, we gather as your people in strange times and in various phases and situations in our lives. We pray for your spirit of unity, that you should hold us all and show us your vision for who we are to be as church. Supply us with what we need, we pray. Open our eyes to new possibilities. Give us the insights that we need and the courage that goes along with that. Loving God, we pray for all of those among us who are in times of transition and grief and wondering. We pray your blessing upon us as we meet here today. In the strong spirit of Jesus, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Okay.
Thank you, Lee.
You're welcome. Over to you. I'm gonna mute myself. There we go.
Okay. Well, it's really important to me that you have as much time as possible with Chris today. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking, but just you will have all seen the introduction to Chris's work that I sent out to you by email. Chris has been working together with us in Pacific Mountain region for at least 15 years. And his work was really foundational to the founding of the leadership initiatives when we first started those way back in the beginning. He's also done a lot of work with congregations directly, and has really made some kind of groundbreaking progress in his work with us. And so I really wanted to bring him to you because I feel like what he offers is incredibly helpful, but also very usable and utilitarian and accessible. So I think it's a great opportunity to learn, and this will be a bit of an introduction, and then maybe we'll have some opportunities to, when we can gather in person again, to do some more in-depth learning with Chris at some point in the future. So as I say, just to avoid using up all of our time, I'm just going to turn things over to you now, Chris. So thank you for being with us. I really, really appreciate any opportunity to hear you and to work with you. So thanks.
Thank you, Trina. Well, it's good to be here with you. It's like, actually, I have to ask the question, where? It's good to be here in this virtual space with you. I live on wlélex, which is how you pronounce that word in my name, which is the Squamish name for Bowen Island, which is near Vancouver in the mouth of Howe Sound, and I've lived here for almost 20 years now, out here on the West Coast. Lived in the West Coast for almost half my life. Born and raised in Ontario, and I'm a United Church guy from way back. My father has a little file of all of his grandfather's papers, and my grandfather kept all kinds of things. And one of the things my grandfather kept was his father's papers. And in his father's papers is a program from a church service that happened in the Mutual Street Arena in 1925 on June 10th, which was the formation of the United Church. So I think my pedigree is pretty good, actually. Like, my family was there at the beginning, and that was 4 generations back. So right there in the Mutual Street Arena in Toronto, probably no doubt representing the Presbyterians would be my guess. And my Saskatchewan family would have joined a little bit later, and they would be representing the Methodists. And so we are what was known back then as a mixed religious family, I think probably is the way to put it. So they were all Saskatchewan social gospel folks. It's good to be with you. I've been asked to share a little model that we've been using a lot. If you were around or you got to meet Gary Patterson when he was the moderator, you probably will have seen this model. I can say he learned it from me, but I helped co-create this model with a number of my colleagues around the world. One of the things that I do for a living is I'm a facilitator and a teacher, and I help organizations, including churches, with strategic work and change work. And it helps to have a map when you're going through a change of any kind. And it helps to think about what kind of system you are, who you are, what kind of organization you are, and to have a map about how things might change. And so much of our culture, I would say, writ large, assumes that change is this linear thing. You know, we go step by step by step from one place to another, all the way through, and we get from point A to point B, or point A to point Z. And when we come to the end of it, we're somehow different. And then we either start all over again, or we, you know, another cycle begins or something. But it's very, very linear, and we tend to think of it as being very, very predictive. And my experience has been that human beings actually behave more like living systems than the machines. I don't know what your experience is, but and so it makes it a little bit, if any of you have ever tried to do any step-by-step linear planning, you'll realize that it's a good idea, but it rarely works in practice, because human beings are just harder to control than sheepdogs, actually. So we need kind of different metaphors and different ideas and different ways of understanding the nature of our systems. And so this framework and this model I'm going to share with you comes from the world of living systems theory. In other words, human beings organize themselves into structures that are themselves alive. And we are, of course, in the church world, motivated by spirit, moved by spirit. We have always one more person at the table than you can count, right? And so lots of things happen, and we can understand it in this way. So I actually want to begin this presentation with you by sharing kind of like a piece of observation or theory from one of our really helpful organizational development guides, the Book of Psalms. This is my favorite psalm by a long way. I love this psalm, and these particular verses are really interesting. I'll just read them, and then we'll move from here. For it was you who formed my inward parts. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works that I know very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes beheld my unformed substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them as yet existed. It's a beautiful psalm. And to me, one of the things that's really, really important about these verses is that it talks about the way living systems work. In other words, that the new comes from inside what has always been. The new comes from within inside the old. The emerging comes within inside the legacy. The seed comes from inside the plant, and the plant comes from inside the seed. That's how we know a thing is alive versus a machine. We make machines by putting pieces together, but we make human beings by birthing them. We make animals by birthing them. Seeds are birthed. So this dynamic of the new arising out of the old is actually really important. And I love to use this psalm as a way of just organizing and guiding our view towards how we use this model. Many of you, all of you will have gotten an email with a diagram, but I'm going to lead you through a little sort of slide presentation that explains it in a bit more detail. And then we're going to play with it, actually, which will be, I think, will be fun. Okay, so here's the model. We call it the 2 loops model for no particular reason. They're not even necessarily loops. It's just, that's the term that's come across. It's not technical language. But what it describes this relationship between a legacy system and an emerging system. And what you can see here is you probably have a sense of things that in a legacy system, there's a time of ascendancy, things reach their peak and then they decline. You might be able to think of a organization or a system near or within you that exhibits that kind of behavior. There's a peak and a decline. And also new things begin. If you've ever started a business or you've ever begun a new chapter in your life, you'll know that things begin and they often get rocky. If you think of this as a graph, the up and down, up is influence. So the higher, the more towards the top of this frame, you would say that something is more influential, and at the bottom, things are like less influential, maybe even less stable. And you know, if you've ever started a business or begun an initiative of some kind, even a relationship or a friendship, it can be a bit rocky at the beginning, but then you find your feet and you suddenly move on. And there's a relationship between these two systems. The new and the old interact, but they don't move in a line. They don't move in a wave. So it's not like when the legacy system declines, then the new system begins. The new is always contained within the old. That's the lesson of that psalm. And it's the lesson of biology, of life, if you look around. The new always begins within the old. And so there's a relationship between these two things, which is really important to understand. And any change, any system exhibits all of this at the same time. So you can think of yourself as being at a point in this graph. You might be somebody who's involved in the legacy system. You might be somebody who's involved in something new, or you might be on this little thin rope bridge between the two of them. But despite where you are in the system, we need to remember and understand that the whole system is like this all the time. So think about this as like a map, a top map, a map of a territory or a community. The community is always there, even if you're only on one street, right? The community doesn't disappear just because you're on one street. The rest of the community is there, and we can look at the map and we can go, I'm here and everybody else is over there. Okay, so far so good. So understanding these relationships, that the new and the old are connected, they're not different, and that's really important. This model, at different times in this model, this is also kind of a model of time, and at different times what we do is we exhibit different forms of leadership in this model. So for the legacy system, as the system is growing and stabilizing and becoming influential, and the way, you know, finding its form and finding its place in the world, it gets stewarded really well. And, you know, many of you can probably, I'm going to put you guys on gallery view so I can see a bunch of you, but how many of you, and this is a little way we can do some easy peasy polling here. You can just cover your camera there. If you answer yes to this question, how many of you are in roles in your life where you're stewarding something, keeping it going the way it is? How many of you is that a familiar thing with? Just cover your camera. You find yourself stewarding something. Okay, cool. So at least on the one screen I'm looking at is maybe 40, 50% of you. And that's very, very common. Of course, we see that in you know, in the church system, that looks like committees and structures and, you know, orders of ministry and all of that kind of stuff. It's all structural stuff that we steward and we look after and take care of. As the system begins to decline, though, what happens is that we need different forms of leadership. So these forms of leadership don't serve as the system is declining. We can't steward a system that's coming apart. And at a certain point, with everything in life, change is inevitable. Change will happen. This is the story of Christianity. It's been this way for 2,000 years. The churches that we have today are not the churches that Paul was setting up as he's traveling through the Mediterranean. And those churches, I've been to some of those churches in Cappadocia. Maybe you have as well. Those are very different from United Churches in downtown Calgary or Lethbridge or Red Deer or Okotoks or Stettler or Drumheller or, you know, like all the different places. So things will change over time. And I'm always imagining what the feeling of when my great-grandfather was at that United Church service in 1925, what it must have felt like for him as a lifelong Presbyterian coming from an Ulster Scots family, all Presbyterians from Northern Ireland, to have given up their denomination in order to join the United Church. Can you imagine what that would have felt like? I mean, I just can't imagine. If you've been through a congregational amalgamation, you might have a sense of what it would feel like. These were entire denominations that came together. And it couldn't have been easy. And it wasn't the kind of thing where we said, we're on top of the world, let's get together with the Methodists. Like, I've never heard a Presbyterian ever say a thing like that. So I'm not sure that in 1925 that would have been any easier. There must have been a letting go. There must have been a way in which people said, you know, it's time for us to move, to become a new thing. Something is bubbling here in Canada, something that wants us to become together and united and have a creed together that represents 3 different new denominations, one that we can invite others to join us in. And so they had to hospice the old. And that, you know, if you've been around in the United Church, you know, through the 80s, for example, and in 1988, we had a very big split in the church. And in other times, you will know that there is a time of letting go. That is a grieving time. We're trying to steward and hold on to something, but there's almost an inevitability to what is about to happen. And hosting people through the demise of a structure, this is true in our personal lives. if you've been with people as they've died, hospicing them, caring for them, recognizing the moment, the pain of the moment, and holding them as the world feels like it's dissolving around them is very important. So this is an important leadership move when a system is on its way out. But it's not the end of the world. That's the thing. This is a tricky area because we often confuse this area with the end of our world. So as we hospice and say goodbye to the old, often we make the transition over to the new. And so that way of that mutual street arena service in 1925 was the way all of those denominations made the transition to the new, right? And there's some optimism to be offered in here. But this is never easy, because if you've spent your whole life on this loop, the legacy loop, it's very hard to see the new one. Very hard. And especially if you've been a steward, especially if your life has been devoted to preserving what it is, the tradition, the legacy, what's been gifted to you, what's been entrusted to you. It's very difficult to see the new one. So this is an emotionally fraught time. But for me, it's full of grief, and it's also full of optimism and creativity as well. Because the transition to the new can be a journey of crossing over, and we have that in our tradition, of moving into a wilderness and crossing over a river and a threshold into something new. That is the story of the Exodus. And that story is like such a powerful story for what it means to transition to the new. And it also is a time when we can compost, when we can give the gifts that have been given to us. As old systems begin to decline, the resources are needed for new systems. I live in a rainforest, and I walk out into the rainforest, I can see nurse logs everywhere, old trees that have grown their whole life for hundreds of years and have fallen down and are now nursing the new by offering themselves as nutrients. They don't sort of get up and walk away. That's not what they do. So the composting can be a very beautiful time when you're able to free the resources from the old system and support what's coming and what's new, and give it enough credibility so that the transition is easy. The transition is not easy, but the transition is more comfortable for people who move across. So composting can be a time of excitement. And we see this with, for example, I do a lot of work and have done a lot of work with the Vancouver Foundation here in Vancouver. It's the largest community foundation in Canada. And the Vancouver Foundation holds a lot of gifts that have come from people whose businesses have folded or whose churches have folded, and the assets are wanting to be placed for the benefit of community. So the Vancouver Foundation is one of those organizations, and many community foundations are like this, that repurposes the assets of the community. It's quite beautiful. And then you get to give, right? So you get to gift the gifts that were gifted to you, right? So that's the act of intentional composting. So the legacy system, and I think, here in the United Church world, I think we're very much in this whole thing. We don't know what the new looks like. We sure know what the old looks like, because we're still holding on to parts of it for sure. And we're inheriting a lot of tradition and a lot of our own personal histories bound up in the churches. I hear all the time working with congregations, I was baptized in this church and I wanted my funeral to be in this church. And it's heartbreaking when that can't happen. It's beautiful when it can, when I can have the whole lifespan of myself in a church. So that's the old system, the legacy system. I sometimes call it the old system, but I want to be very careful not to stigmatize either of these two systems, right? It's not the old system, the one we have to get rid of. It's just the one that's been, right? And it's what we know, and it's the legacy that we've received. So when I say old, please don't see it as a stigmatizing of that system. So here's what happens though. As the new system is emerging, this is how it emerges. Now, this relationship is really interesting. So the old system doesn't die and then we get on with the new. That's not what happens. The new is among us. I don't know how many of you remember that movie. Do you remember the movie, The Graduate? Dustin Hoffman movie? Do you remember that movie? Because it's got a famous line in it. You remember the line, right? Plastics, plastics, plastics. Come on, young man. He takes his son-in-law, I think, or his prospective son-in-law under his arm, and he says, the plastics baron, plastics is the future, plastics, plastics. And if you know the movie, it doesn't quite end up that Dustin Hoffman becomes a plastics, goes into plastics as a business leader. He kind of steps out and drops out. And what happens is that even when plastics is the way to go, many other people will step out and go, you know what? I don't think so, not for me. And they'll leave. And they'll step out and they'll begin to innovate something else. So if you think about this in terms of energy, boy, during that plastics era in the 1960s, when oil was everything and plastics was everything, there were people that were leaving and building tree houses in the Kootenays and living off the land, and I'm not going to use oil, I'm going to live off of solar panels and wind, and they failed miserably for many years, right, as they were trying to do it. And now they're making electric vehicles and we're driving all of those things, and Alberta's coated in windmills now. You never would have thought it. So there's like the new emerges at the height of the old, not when the old has disappeared, because all of the resources here enable people to walk out and leave, right? And what happens is when people walk away, they often find people that have always been left out, right? So I talk about this space of innovation as the space where people have made a break with the legacy system and found both their own calling there, and maybe found people that never were part of the legacy system to begin with, right? And so that's really interesting, because there is a bundle of innovators who are off trying to do something. This, we see this now. We see this in the United Church. We see that many people have left our congregations. A friend of mine leads community choirs in Nanaimo. And she was really funny. She's not a United Church member, but she has led United Church choirs, and she knows about the church and things that are going on. And she said to me, I met her on a ferry coming back from Nanaimo once, and I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" She goes, "Oh, I'm leading a community choir in Nanaimo." And it's like, "Oh yeah, I know the church." She said, "Yeah, the church is, it's really sad when I sit down and talk to the minister in the congregation, because there's only maybe 30 or 40 people that come on a Sunday. It used to be a big thriving church. But they can see what's right among them." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Well, I lead a community choir of 100 people. And every Wednesday night we meet in the basement of this church and we sing. And we sing songs, spiritual, we sing all kinds of songs, right? And their choir upstairs on a Sunday morning is only about 5 or 6 people, right? And then on Thursdays, what happens in that church basement is there's 50 people in there doing yoga. And on Tuesdays, there's a meditation group with like another 70 people. And upstairs, they got 40 on a Sunday. And they think they're dying." And she was like, "They're not dying. They're thriving. It's just happening downstairs. People crave spirit. People crave community. People crave singing together. But if you're only looking at who's in the pews, you're missing it," right? And of course, that's understandable, because if that's all you've known, you're going to just see like what I'm seeing around me. But the innovations, the new system is actually being born right around you. It's not something you have to wait to look for. It's, as the Psalm says, it's happening. The Psalm says God knows it's happening. It's happening in secret. It's happening in the earth. It's happening underground. In some cases, literally in the basement of the church, right? Spirit, community, connection to spirit, meditation, singing, prayer is happening. Right. In fact, I don't know a time in my life, and I've lived 52 years. I can't remember a time in my life when conversations about spirit and community have been so mainstream. I can go into any of the clients I work with, whether they're in the secular world, and I can talk about spirit and nobody bats an eye. Right. So yeah, we get that. Sure, for sure. Like when you come together, have a great conversation, spirit flows. We get that. Right? Even without the grounding and the depth of theology and all of our scriptural inheritance. So the innovators are there. And here's what happens though. Innovators have very little power because they're alone. So when they start their innovations, the new system often fails. And this does it no favors, friends. The new system does no favors by constantly failing. It's not like when you leave the world of plastics and enter into something else, you're guaranteed success. Right? Again, any of you that have started a business or engaged in a new enterprise, taken on a new craft, will know that your first few carvings are absolute garbage. They're not your masterpieces. It's not what you're going to be selling. And if you get stuck on that, you're going to feel like you're a failure. And you're going to have to overcome the people that always told you couldn't do it. You're going to have to overcome that, because those folks are going to be out there going, "You see, I knew you would fail. You should just get back in here with us. I knew it wasn't going to work." Like, well, yeah, but we don't have the resources or the history or the time or the connections. I'm just trying to figure out what I want to do here. And I know I don't want to be in the legacy system. I know I want to be somewhere else, right? So failure will happen for a while until people begin to find each other and form networks. until I start Googling who else is living in a treehouse in the Kootenays, and I start finding those folks, and we start living together and sharing resources and knowledge and practices and understanding, right? And we start talking and creating possibilities, finding little pots of money somewhere to keep things going, right? So the emerging system begins because people connect to one another. If you have no power in the world and you want to change something or make something new, you can always connect to another person, right? Every innovation in the world, every new system in the world began with people connecting. And they didn't have money, and they didn't have power, and they didn't have anything else. So go looking for the folks without power. Go looking for the folks at the margins. Those are the ones that are creating a new world. If you living out here in British Columbia, there is just like, I don't know if you've been following along, but one of the biggest real estate developments that's going to be happening here in Vancouver is being stewarded by the Squamish Nation on a piece of reserve land near False Creek on the Burrard Street Bridge. And they are able to do so much creative stuff because it's on reserve land, even though it's in the middle of the city. So it's not subjected to city bylaws. And what they're doing is actually bringing in high level sustainable development principles, like absolute top of the line best practices that the city of Vancouver hasn't even caught up to yet. And the city of Vancouver doesn't do a terrible job at development. It's, you know, like every other city, it's got its issues. But the Squamish Nation is leapfrogging everybody. And so people are beginning to go, this is fantastic. If the Squamish Nation does this, it will set a new system of influence that could change the way we do sustainable urban living, right? And we get to do that because it's in a completely different place. It's always been left out, right? Indigenous communities have always been left out of what the mainstream is doing, so they've had to innovate on their own. Suddenly, they have a multi-billion-dollar project going because they've got a great piece of land and a bunch of investors that are going to work with them. Look for the networks. Our church may die, but our religion isn't, right? Christianity has a role in the world. It has for 2,000 years. It outlives all forms of structure, right? Just when you think the structure is decaying and falling away, along comes somebody to nail something to a church door. Along comes a few people meeting in a basement somewhere. Along comes a group of people who start out going hiking and end up encountering spirit, right? And something happens. So the seeds of transformation have always been among us, even as far back as the 1960s when the United Church was the only game in town. Networks, as they grow, become communities of practice. And you can see the difference in these shapes. A network is self-centered. It's about me. What can I get? How can I connect? Where can I learn from others? How can I get resources to make this thing happen? Who can I work with? But a community of practice is when we come together around a purpose. Suddenly it's not about us, it's about something bigger, right? It's about a purpose that we're engaged in. It's about trying to achieve something bigger than all of us, something that none of us can do alone. So a community of practice is the next phase, and then things become a system of influence as they get more stable. And it turns out that new systems need stewards as well, right? New systems need people to eventually cut paychecks, create human resource policies, right? Create relationships with other organizations, deal with issues of equity and diversity. Like the new will become the old again, because this cycle repeats endlessly at all levels and scales. So congregations go through this, families go through this. You as a human being probably can think of a time when you've gone through this, when you've left something really stable to head out and do something new. That was my story when I was 26 years old, moving to the West Coast. Gave up my family, my life, my job in Ontario, moved all the way out to the West Coast, just following my heart because my beloved was born here. And so, you know, you can't keep a BC girl in Ontario for too many winters. She's got to go back home, and you either go with her or you don't. So I did. But you know that you might know what that feels like as you become a system of influence. So we talk about these leadership capacities in the two loops model, these things here. If you can name each other, if you can name what you're doing, you can find each other. So a group of people just meeting for meditation every week is great, but what are we called, right? Seekers, you know, you see with the emerging church experiments that are happening all over. Sometimes people call themselves followers of the way, right? I'm involved with a contemplative community here on Bowen Island. I'm on the board of the Rivendell Retreat Center. And we're using new language to try and describe what we're doing. It's an interdenominational, and I would dare say even ecumenical place where we practice contemplation in spirit and connection to spirit. But trying to give ourselves a name is really tricky. How do you call that? Are we a new church? No, we're not a new church. What are we exactly? So wrestling with a name is helpful, but once we have a name, then we can connect, right? And we start seeing this in the United Church now, people connecting each other to other resources. Oh, you're doing that in Alberta. I know someone in Newfoundland who's doing that. So that the General Council office becomes connectors rather than managers. They start connecting people together because the new structure is beginning to emerge. And then we nourish the communities of practice. We provide resources, we provide time and power and structure so that they can be able to grow something that's bigger than just themselves, that's more stable, more long lasting than a network that's very ephemeral. And finally, when we get a system of influence, it's really useful to illuminate it, to stand here at the end of the bridge, this tender bridge, and say, call to the people over here, you don't need to die, it's safe, you can come over. It's like the stories of the spies in Exodus when they crossed over the River Jordan. The whole nation of Israel didn't go at once. They sent some folks over to kind of see if it was okay, right? And they met a few people over there and they kind of scoped the land out. And then they came back and they said, it's good, we can move, right? So if you've got something people can move to, it's like shine. You know, Jesus' parable, I love the parable about putting your light under a basket because you know, I just feel so sorry for the disciples all the time. Jesus seems to have picked like the 12 dumbest guys he could find. You know, and he has to give a teaching like, you know, when you light a candle, they're like, yeah. It's like, don't put a basket over it. Oh, that explains why it gets dark in my room. You know, it's like, yeah, just like let it light, let it shine. You know, if you've got something, let it shine. Okay, so the disciples are like, oh, you know, slugging each other in the arm. Hey, let's try that tonight. Let's not put the basket over top of the candle. Okay, so you illuminate what you've got because that helps the transition, that helps bring people over. In all of these loops, this is a kind of more detailed look at. This is the kind of stuff we need to do to enable this. This work, these flows, you can't stop them, folks. They're the waves of change. This is what happens. You can't stop them, but you can surf them. So, you know, as you're stewarding a system, what you're doing is you're structuring it, you're stabilizing it, you're resourcing it, you're making sure it's got good hierarchy and good structure. You're creating bureaucracy because that's actually useful when you're stabilizing something. Accountabilities, responsibilities. You're doing planning, but it's fail-safe. You're not taking a lot of risks. As you get to be really influential, really smart leaders will start to do scenario planning. What could be next? Where could this come and go? What could happen? You know, you never want to assume that the line will now, having reached its peak, continue here forever. That's a bit folly. That's not smart. It's not good planning because things do inevitably decline. So how do we host the shadow and the fear? How do we deal with conflict? And how do we use our power not to be angry, but to help people make the transition? How do we hospice and harvest and honor what's gone before? I mean, you guys live in a rural province and not all of you are in rural areas, but you know a lot about harvesting. Like, how do you harvest from what's happened? How do you take it and use it to feed the new, right? And then if you're not going to make it over, how do you grieve? How do you grieve it? Not everybody makes the transition. I mean, in the Exodus story, there's a really beautiful moment. You know, how many people that are, first of all, how many people do you think were born in slavery in Egypt and actually made the transition into over the Jordan River? Just hold your hands up in front of the camera with the number of people you think actually made that. 2 people. Gloria's got 2, 3 people. Yeah, I think it's 3. I think it's Aaron and his 2 parents, right? Moses' brother Aaron and his 2 parents. I think the only 2 people that were born in slavery in Egypt and made the transition. Everybody else was different. They were born in the desert. People came to the desert and died. They never made it. And others were born in the desert and they never knew Egypt. And they crossed the Jordan into the promised land. They were only ever knew the desert. It's a fascinating story. And Moses, what about him? He never crossed. Moses got called by God and said, you know that thing with the calf that we did back in the desert? And he's like, yeah. He said, you can't go there. You got to stay with me. And I always thought of this as like the midrash I tell about that story is actually Moses didn't get to go to the Holy Land. Instead, he got to spend the rest of his life with God on a mountaintop. That's not a bad trade. I think after everything that the nation of Israel had put Moses through, probably that was a decent retirement plan. but he didn't go all the way. So sometimes you just compost, you let the new leadership take over, you're not going to survive it. And I've seen this with many congregations also. As we're moving into the new, there's other ways we can support people. You helping people to leave if it doesn't work for them, but staying in relationship is really helpful. There were some beautiful stories during 1988 here of our congregation on Bowen Island split down the middle. In fact, the minister took the cross and walked out of the church. It was dramatic, and he walked up the road and founded a new church. And it was hard. And the people in our local United Church congregation stayed in touch with the people who formed a new community church, because they're neighbors and friends, and staying, yeah, you can step out. We understand why you're doing it, but we also understand that there's something bigger going on here. You are Christians. You are members of our community. We still do love you, right? And so stepping out, finding each other, staying connected. And it's not like being banished or being exiled, right? It's about trying to do a new thing. In here, we support failure, because failure is how you learn to create the new thing. So making new prototypes, failing. People will say, oh yeah, they tried that experiment, but it only lasted 3 months. They knew it wouldn't last. Right? Of course it wouldn't last. It's a new thing. We have no guarantee of success. Failing in our new form is totally acceptable here. Failure here is really risky. You don't want to fail here. But failing here is what it's all about. If you're going to try a new thing, you're going to fail at it. So fail, but keep it together. Work with each other, weave loose connections together, find each other, make a network. And then there's this level of like keeping it together when it looks like the thing you're trying to create just is never going to be born. My first child, my partner was pregnant for 42 weeks, which is actually quite a long time. My first child's due date was 3 weeks after, or my first child was born 3 weeks after her due date. And there was a moment when we thought it was never going to happen. We just thought like, this child's never going to be born, right? So we kind of had to keep it together for a while. And then eventually you get some energy. You see some small wins. Some things begin to happen. You begin to nourish a community of practice. You begin to concretize things. You begin to take what was an otherwise a loose aggregation of ideas, and you get to make it concrete. You invite others. You've got something now. You've got something that even looks credible to the folks that are over here waiting for a transition, right? Come on over, it'll be fine, right? Think about 1925, that's what happened. 1925 was not the end of the United Church and then it's like, okay, now that's over, let's get to work trying to create the new thing. The new thing was ready. It was ready. 1925, June 10th was the moment when people made this transition. When the new folks, right? When the new folks said, it looks like what you're used to, but it's not the same. Come on over. And all of these folks did. Not every Presbyterian congregation, of course, did. There's Presbyterian churches all over Canada that never joined the United Church, as our Methodists as well. So not everybody makes the transition, but at some point you become credible enough that you can do it. And that's not and you don't look like the same. You're not the same as the old way. You're not the same as the legacy. You're a new thing. So that's the model. That's how it works. There's the psalm at the end again. You form my inward parts. I love this piece here. My frame was never hidden from you. I just feel like because we are people of the way, we can say that I think God knows us. Right? I think this structure is known, even if it's not known to us. That if we can trust and have faith that this journey that's been codified in our stories that are handed to us, the stories of crossing over, the stories of exile, the stories of moving from one place to another, of liberation and enslavement, of needing to break free of our chains and create something new, those stories are encoded in our tradition for a reason, because there's an inevitability to this work, right? And so we're reminded of it. So I'm going to stop there. And then I would like to invite you to play with me. I'm sure you have questions. So if you do have questions, what you can do is you can type them into the chat. That's one way we can gather questions. But better than me answering a whole bunch of questions, I would like to invite you to come and play here. So I am going to show you a place where we can do that. And we'll spend a little moment playing. Not all of you will be able to do this. If you're on your phone, this isn't going to work all that well. So don't worry too much about it. If you are on Internet Explorer, this also isn't going to work too well. But in a moment, I'm going to give you a link to a Miro board, and some of you played on Miro. This is just a place where we can play here. On Miro, you can zoom in and out. Down in here in the corner, there's a little thing that helps you to zoom in and out. You can zoom in like this. I can also use it with my mouse. The mouse I've got helps me to move in and out. And you're going to find here some instructions and a sticky note. Now, all I invite you to do is to zoom in on one of these sticky notes and answer this question. The question is, where do you find yourself at the moment with respect to your faith community? When you think of all of these loops, where do you find yourself? And I'll just invite you to zoom in on a Post-it note anywhere. You can zoom right in close and you double click on it and you can just write about like what it's like where you are. So if you find yourself as somebody who's creating a new thing, I can say creating a new thing is hard because we don't get respect. We will forgive all spelling errors and grammar errors. I'm not even going to correct it. And then you grab this, you take your Post-it note and you click on it and you can just drag it and put it somewhere here. That's where I am. Okay, so in a moment, I'm going to give you access to this board. Now, when I do, you're going to see a lot of cursors come into here. And so you see this is a very important arrow. This arrow up here, if I hit that arrow, it's going to hide the collaborator's cursor. So I'm going to show you how to do that in just a sec. Now, not all of you need to do this. If you're not comfortable using this technology here, that's fine. But you can just reflect on the question, which I'll put into the chat in a moment. But I'm going to put the Miro link here. So if you're up for playing on the Miro board, here's the link. Some of you can click on it, and I will show you what I mean by all these crazy cursors that are going to be. Now, you can see as people arrive, you see all these cursors that are starting to arrive? That can drive you nuts. Certainly drives me nuts. So the way you turn that off is you move up here and you click that blue arrow and they all disappear. Okay, and then you can zoom in, find a Post-it note. You can see somebody's already doing it. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to give you a moment to think about the question, which is, where are you at the moment with respect to this model? And just think a little bit about why you are there, to explain why you chose that spot on the graphs. So where are you in the model, and what's it like to be there? So I've also put it in the chat. If you don't want to go to the Miro board, you can just meditate a little bit on that. And I'm going to share my screen and a little bit of music and give you a couple of minutes just to do this. Okay. I won't share my screen. I will just share the music. I'll just give you another couple of minutes, and then I'm going to move you into some breakout groups, and you can talk a little bit about what's coming up for you. So just another minute or two to think about this. So I'm going to move you into breakout rooms, and I'm going to give you about 10 minutes just now. I've put into the take 10 minds. I've put into the chat. Take 10 minutes to discuss what's coming up for you. What insights or questions do you have? You're going to be in a group with 3 other people, so you'll have a chance just to chat about what's coming up for you and what questions and insights you've got. Are you ready? I'm going to transport you by flu powder into these breakout rooms, and you can meet one another. There we go. That's everybody. How's it going, Chris?
Oh, all right. I'm doing 12 things at once, but you know, enjoying the presentation, the parts that I get to listen to.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, everything's going well here, so that's good. Are you usually the tech person on these calls?
That's a stretch. I am usually yeah, supporting the meetings for sure, but Zoom has been a learning curve for lots of people, including myself. So
interesting. Yeah. I've been using Zoom for a long time now, so it's feeling like things came along just at the right time. Mm. Stop that. Mm. Welcome back, Elaine. Oh, Candace.
Just take an opportunity to thank you, Chris. It's tremendous. Just so interesting.
Oh, thank you, Elaine. Great. I think everybody's back now. Welcome back. I want to be respectful of your time. So I will say that I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes if folks want to share questions and insights. And also I won't, there's no more to teach. So, I mean, I'll answer some questions if folks want to stay on, but if you do need to leave now at the top of the hour, you're very welcome to. And I thank you for spending a little bit of time with us. Otherwise, we can just spend a little bit more time here if you'd like with any questions or insights. I'm curious what you have. You can type them in the chat or maybe put your hand up. Probably you know how to do that by clicking on the reactions button down there and raise your hand. And want to do that? That's good. Sean, I see you
Yeah,
there.
thank you. That's a great presentation. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Just wondering what does COVID say to you about this model?
Well, I think for me, COVID says the COVID throws into relief how hard it is to do things the old way. Like we've had to do things the new way all the time, right? So the rigid systems that hold us in place, for example, the education system, which is reliable and we can count on it, it's going to be the same all the time. We know what our kids are going to be at. It's totally out of the it's totally out of the levels of its tolerance. Like it's creaking and quaking, and there's new ways of doing things. And what's interesting is I homeschooled my kids for the first 10 or 13 years of their life. All of a sudden, the people that are suffering at home with homeschooling and all this kind of stuff, suddenly they're looking at people who, my kids are 23 and 20 years old, so they don't live with me anymore. Suddenly they're looking at us. It's like, yeah, 20 years ago we were homeschooling. We've got lots of advice for you. You're going to be okay. Like we were literally the folks that walked out in that sense. So as the old system is quaking, and COVID is doing that to a lot of our institutions, folks that are looking around and are able to connect with the people that have been on the edges, on the margins, or innovating, they're getting resources, right? So rigidity hates chaos.
Yeah. I kind of feel like in some ways we're sort of almost hovering above the loop right now. Like it's taken us out of the regular system, and it's almost like we're observing it, and then we're going to get plunked back in, but in a new place from where we were before, because everything is so different and we've learned so many things, and some of the limitations have been taken away. Yeah. Which is the really exciting thing. Like we figured out we can do a lot of things that we didn't think we could do.
Yeah, including stabilizing things. So for example, who knew we could create a universal income benefit? Like, people have been after that for years, decades, right? And all of a sudden, like literally in 5 weeks, we had that. And it meant the world to people that don't have stable incomes. It meant the world to literally tens of thousands of people who could finally pay off a credit card debt, who could finally stabilize their income, who could finally pay a rent or a bill that they were behind on. Just that kind of stuff was super important. So yeah, it's interesting.
The comment in there from Justin, I think is good. How do we have conversations with people that are firmly stewarding valuable modes of being, yet are still very much thinking they're innovating new ways of being that are now 30 to 40 years old?
It's a great question, because they were probably innovators at some point, right? Like the hippies are in charge now kind of thing. Like how many of you were countercultural back in the 1960s, and now we're like, come on, the kids are like, get out of the way. The deal here is like, one of the reasons I love using this model is because in a system like churches, we have people at all different places in these systems. And it gets to be tricky when people are stigmatizing one another, which is what I said at the outset. When people are saying, oh, you guys are just hanging on to something that's dying, you got to let it go, which is not a helpful comment. Or you guys don't know what you're doing. You're just making it up as you go along, and this doesn't have any chance of success, which is also not a helpful comment. But both of those are totally understandable. But the beauty of drawing a map like this or taking people through an exercise like this is that you begin to see where everybody's at. And you begin to have some empathy for, like, thank you for stewarding the old system, because yes, I'm creating a new thing. And thank you for making sure my paycheck gets out on time. That's really helpful, right? And the new people are like, like you can see some of these Post-it notes. I've been waiting forever for someone to create a new way of being for me. I've been holding this church together until somebody showed me it was safe to move. And I've seen that increasingly happen, that people are like, thank you, thank God for what you've been doing out there. So I think this can be a very good conflict resolution tool, in that it begins with a process of seeing that the entire system is like this all the time, and we need people everywhere. We need people everywhere. So, if you find yourself in any one of those places, thank you. Right?
Joanne says, what is the best way to find other people like you?
Other people
I'm
like
not
me?
sure what she means exactly.
What do you mean, Joanne? Do you want to say more?
Yeah, you said that you name yourself and then you find other people like you.
Oh, right.
So how do you find other people like you?
Yeah. You put on a funny hat and see who is curious where you bought it. You preach a sermon and see who says that resonated with me. Like, you do something a little bit outrageous. This is the innovators need to make themselves visible. Yeah. So you do something a little crazy. Maybe you wear a cross, and then people kind of go, oh, you're one of them. Right? Like, it's the little signals, right? Oh, Joanne actually has a funny hat. Well, why am I even answering this question? Like, if you got a funny hat, put it on. So it's a way of like signaling that you're one of those folks that's out there. But I would always say too, like, also go to the alleys, like the Gregory Porter song. Do you know the Gregory Porter song? Take me to the alley. Take me to the alley. Take me to the afflicted ones. It begins with this thing about like, well, they gild their houses in preparation for the king, and they line the sidewalks with every kind of shiny thing. The old system. Won't they be surprised when he says, take me to the alley? When Jesus arrives and it's like, your houses look great. I'm going to the alley. Take me to the afflicted ones. Take me to the lonely ones that somehow lost their way, and let them hear me say, I'll be your friend. Come to my table, rest in my garden. You will have a pardon. Those are your people. If you're creating the new thing, the people that were never part of the old thing, those are your immediate peers, right? And they've got lots to teach you. Lots to teach you. Diversity isn't just like a nice buzzword, a social justice warrior moment. We need diversity to thrive. If you're trying to do a new thing and you look the same as you always have, you won't do a new thing. It just won't be new. That's fine, but it won't be new, right? That's how you find people like you, or people that are different than you, is actually what I should be saying. Other questions, insights, comments, curiosities?
John and Anne have raised their hand.
Great, go ahead, John. I can't see all the hands raised for some reason.
Is it crazy to think that we would actually have a second sticky as we're going into like a totally different like hybrid ministry, where you really, it's not as mature as your other piece of ministry. It's not completely 100% aligned. It's like, but is there a way to have a second sticky that you really are in the two very different points, and actually the realization of having them as trying to join one with the other actually is detrimental to each other at some point? Is that okay?
Is it realistic? Don't worry about the sticky, friend. You've got like a real dilemma on your hands.
Okay.
That's the truth of it, right? So the truth of it is that these are all existing at all the time. Like, we are in that model can describe Christianity, like pre and post Reformation, if you want it to. Like, it could be that long term. It can also describe what happened in your family this week, right? Or what's gone on for you during COVID, or what's happening in your congregation over the last 10 years, or where did the presbyteries go? What's this region thing? Like, it explains all of those kinds of things. So the point being that we are in all of those places all at the same time at different scales. And what I'm doing is I'm kind of foregrounding it. When I work with a congregation, for example, I'll say, just with respect to this congregation, where are we? But the beauty is that people that are stewards in a congregation, this is an important thing. I found this before. People that are like, you know, the guys that run the ones that run the finance committee in the congregation, who everybody thinks are the stodgy, you know, you're running a finance committee. We're trying to do new things here and you just keep demanding accountability and it's not working. Those people, sometimes they're entrepreneurs. They've started more businesses than you've imagined are possible and failed more times than you can imagine possible. Those people are innovators in a different context. And so if we can bring in their skills, right? If we can bring in that way of being into the dynamic, it actually creates a richness that's there. And right, so, you know, yes, we're in all of those things all the time. Sometimes we find ourselves holding on while trying to do a new thing, right? Put your hands up, parents. Just, you know, anybody that's had teenagers in their lives in whatever way will understand what that feels like. But that's the truth of the reality of it. And that's what makes this work emotional. That's what makes this work both meaningful and hard. And so it becomes about the conversations we have with one another, the leadership we take, and the grace that we offer.
Thank you.
I think that's my take. Your mileage may vary. Anything else? Other questions or comments?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you for a great presentation.
You're welcome, Gordon. Where's Three Hills?
Well, about 80 mile, 100 kilometers northeast of Calgary.
Okay, gotcha. Yep.
East of Olds.
East of Olds.
Yep.
One time I had a friend that, one time I was in Drumheller and this guy said to me, where are you going next? We were traveling and I said, we're going to Calgary probably. And he said, go to Olds. And I said, why should I go to Olds over Calgary? And he said, free parking. That's a good reason. So that's why I ended up at Olds.
John, did you have another question?
I didn't. I was more of a comment. I meant to take my hand down, but I might as well say it. I think COVID is actually, well, one of the things liminal space will tell you, suddenly things that took forever happen quickly. So the urgency. But I think the United Church, this is really great for us because in the last year, just in our own region, the level of engagement, learning, study, this kind of presentation has, been fabulous for us as we rethink all this stuff. And I think Zoom has encouraged people to engage in a way we couldn't before, or we wouldn't before, sorry.
Yeah, I think that's quite true. I mean, I think we're experimenting in ways we never would have. Like our little church here, we're lucky we have a professional videographer married to our minister. So like the quality of our services are amazing, even though maybe 30 people watch them. But it's allowed us to do things we've never done before. Just so interesting, right? So interesting.
Well, I'm aware it's 2:15, so thank you, Chris, and we really appreciate everything that you've brought, and I know we'll want to have more engagement with you in the future. So we say this is just really a great introduction to what you bring to the table, and Chris also does some amazing work around hosting conversations, which is also a really great conversation to engage with Chris on. So I'm sure his name will be coming across your email inbox in the not too distant future.
Yeah, I'm going to leave my website here in the chat that you can have you have to copy and paste that one. You can click through, and I blog and write about all of this stuff. So if you do want to learn more, just go to my website. There's a lot of resources and materials, and the search box there is your friend. You can enter in a term like 2 loops and you'll find lots of stuff that's there. So yeah, I just welcome any connection, any questions. You can feel free to reach out and say hi.
So Lee, do you want to close us off?
Sure. Thank you so much, Chris. And I appreciate the faithfulness of all you folks who have also entered into the process and who have arrived here, who have immersed yourself in this, and who are thinking of some new things. Thank you so much for all of your faithfulness. Is there anyone amongst us who would like to close our meeting with a blessing and a prayer? I'm scanning through. I don't see anybody leaping to the fore. Come on, folk.
I will. I
Thank
will.
you, John. Thank you, John. Thank you.
Okay, my invitation is to look at the screen, get a look at these beautiful faces of lucky people who happen to be on Bowen Island and other unlucky people who may be in other places. We look at these faces and we give thanks for the gift of technology that has allowed us to remain where we are and connect and to learn from Chris. We give thanks for the small groups of conversation that allow us to expand and share our story. And we pray for curiosity to continue to provide and provoke each one of us, holding us and inviting us to walk ever more fully where the Spirit is calling us. May God be with each and every one of us. Amen.
Amen.
Be well.
And also with you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, John.
Peace out.
Thank you.